I'm Ashley Droz, and tonight I am honored to be here with Kristen Coury, the founder, CEO, and producing artistic director of Gulfshore Playhouse, which she established in 2004. Instead of me reading your incredible bio, Kristen, I would love if you would start by introducing us to you and your journey.
Well, I grew up in upstate New York, and my first introduction to theater was through high school theater, like normal kids. And then I decided to major in theater in college, which I did. And as I was getting out, so the entrepreneurial spirit, I suppose, jumped out. This is like by way of bio, but I will tell you, the entrepreneurial spirit jumped out at me, I guess, early. I had gone on a game show when I was in my junior year of college, so I had a little bit of money. And my dad said, you can either buy a car with this or you can change your life. So I decided to go to London and intern there for a year at a theater there. And of course, this was long before the internet really existed. And so I had to find a magazine that showed me Broadway, West End producers and write them actual letters and wait for responses. And of course, I'm getting all these cards back that were saying, oh, darling, we have nothing for you, but we wish you good luck, whatever. And but I went anyway. I moved over to London for a year and I started knocking on doors. And so when I finally found a small not-for-profit theater company, Shakespeare, it was called the English Shakespeare Company. The woman was like, now why on earth should we hire you? And I said, because I'll work for free. And she said, you're hired. So I spent a year there and then went to New York and was working on Broadway. I worked for Walt Disney Theatrical Productions in the early days when it was still trying to figure out how to do theater. They were just producing Beauty and the Beast and Lion King. And so that was exciting times. And then I went to work for Andrew Lloyd Webber's company, which at that point was called Really Useful. And I just read an article, they've changed their name. I don't know why. Why would anyone change their name away from a wonderful company name like the Really Useful Group, which never made sense to me. So I'm glad they've changed it. Working on Sunset Boulevard with Glenn Close, and I went on tour with Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But along the way, I was taking extra things. I went to NYU for a certificate in not-for-profit management, and I went to the New York Film Academy to learn how to also direct film because I had majored in directing theater in school. And so as I got sort of disenchanted with the sitting behind the computer and doing sort of behind the scenes producing and management on Broadway, I started to dream a little bit about doing making a not-for-profit theater company. But in New York, if you want to start anything related to theater, it's you and the 35,000 people next to you, so it's not even worth the bother, really. And so I discovered Naples strictly by accident and moved down here in 2004, like you said, and realized very quickly that Naples didn't have a professional theater. So how we differentiate is there's a performing arts center that was at that point called the Philharmonic Center for the Arts. And they bring in professional tours of theater, of pieces that you've seen on Broadway, but they're not producing theater. And then we have a great community theater as well, but they're using amateurs and volunteers. So what I wanted to create from day one was a professional theater and education center. And there was no place to do that in Naples. So I thought, well, let me just start and figure this out. So I went home to New York and I said, I'm moving to Naples. I went to a lawyer, a friend of mine who was also a Broadway producer. And I said, I'm moving to Naples. I want to start a theater company. I don't have a name for the place. I don't know I don't know anybody in town and I don't have any money. But is it too soon to start? And he said, nope. He said, it's going to take you a year to get your 501c3, which is your government dispensation for a not-for-profit. So get going and you hit the ground running. And so I did. I filled it out. But in order to get the 501c3, I had to come up with 3 board members. And like I told you, I didn't know anybody in Naples. So I asked my realtor if he would be my first board member. And luckily he said yes. And then I convinced my sister to move to Naples as well. So I asked her husband to be my second board member and I could be the third. I only needed 3. And then well, the rest is history, but I'll tell you the rest. But so I started Gulfshore in 2004. And when I looked at the short and long-term goals that I had to write for the government, the long-term goal said to build a state-of-the-art theater and education center with a 400-seat main stage and 150-seat studio theater and an education wing with all the rehearsal rooms and classrooms necessary. And so that was the dream 20 years ago, and it still was 20 years later when we finally opened the doors on November 1st, 2024.
Wow. What a story. I'm hearing a long-term passion.
For sure.
Taking a lot of chances on yourself along the way, learning so much, creating a dream and then a vision, and then just the persistence to make it happen. How incredible. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So you obviously had a creative vision, and something that I read in a bio of yours was that you had a bold vision for cultural excellence in Southwest Florida. So obviously you saw something in Naples and wanted to bring something extra special there. So how did you take that creative vision and
Well, it's a really good question because, first of all, it's Naples. I've since then developed a hashtag. My hashtag is This Is Naples. And I really mean that quite literally because there is just a different level of what people expect here. And that's the same goes for theater as it goes for everything else. We know it's true for food and for wine and for real estate and for all the things, but it's actually also true for theater. These people have been, former CEOs, former magnates, former owners of, sports teams or whatever else. And they also have perhaps lived around the world, but certainly traveled around the world, and they've seen theater in great places around the world. And so when they go see theater, they're like, oh, if it's not Broadway quality, I'm not interested. And so I knew that starting a professional theater was first and foremost in my mind, because I came from Broadway as well, so I would have only wanted to create really high quality theater. But knowing that it's Naples, I was sort of like, and now we have to put everything up a notch. So even though for the first few years, we didn't produce at all because there was no place. In New York, you can rent a theater on every street corner. Can't necessarily fill it, and can't necessarily afford it, but it's there. In Naples, there was nowhere. So we moved into, finally, 4 years later, 2008, we moved into 2006, actually a couple years later, we moved into the Norris Center, and we did our very first tiny play. But even then, the first show we ever did out of the gate was with a Tony Award nominee, nominated actor, and he was amazing. And so even if we were building tiny sets, and even if we only had at first one person, later 2 or 3 people, we didn't really have an aggregate of employees until about 10 years in, until 2014, just when we went over finally $1 million budget, and we really had I started the first few years out of my house. I didn't get paid for the first 3 years. We didn't have any money. And any money that I was spending was whatever I had sold my co-op for and the proceeds that I had made there. And the second 3 years, the first 6 years I didn't get paid. The first 3 years I didn't get paid. Second 3 years, I had a little bit of a board, maybe 5 people by that point, and they decided that it was unfair that I was not getting paid, so they were going to pay me $15,000 a year. But we couldn't even really afford to pay me $15,000 a year, so I deferred that money. So for a full 6 years, I was just sort of like trying to, provide for myself and keep the idea going. So in many ways, the business model is sort of set on the idea of what a regional theater is. It's not for profit. You are usually spending a lot of money for people. In our case, because I wanted to create a professional theater, and there are no professional actors in Naples, immediately the model became use people from New York. So it became find a good casting director, go to New York several times a year, bring people down. And that comes with a cost. So figuring out how to cover that. But I always employed something called the Merlin principle. And for me, the definition of the Merlin principle is looking at the end goal, the end result, and then imagining it and visualizing it, but also working your way backward from that. If I'm going to get there by X, then I will have had to accomplish this by Y, and that by Z, and you work your way back. So another thing is that now I run a not-for-profit, so for people who are entrepreneurs who have to get investment, it's the same thing, right? It's like you're looking for investors or you're looking for donors. In reality, it's all like you're trying to use someone else's money to do the thing that you're passionate about, right? But the thing that I did that I think no good business book would ever tell you to do was that if you're running a business and you're successful in a year, then it's going to say, now you've done it that year, you were successful, so add 2% or 5% to your budget and, sort of rinse and repeat. And I was always like, growth mindset, always. So we grew from $0 in the first year to now our budget is 21 years later, $14.5 million, and we've always run in the black. So our chart goes like this. And part of the reason is because I would say, well, what do I want to do next year? Next year I really want to hire a general manager. I don't have anybody to help me. I want to do a second play. I want to make sure that we have this educational program started. And I would look at it and say, well, that's going to cost an extra $250,000. Well, then add $250,000 to the budget and figure out how to raise it. And that's what I always did. And still to this day, that's what we did. Because when we moved into the new building last year, We went from a $8 million budget to a $12 million budget, $11.8 million. And then this year we jumped again to 14.5 million because we realized all the things we didn't know we needed by being in the theater for the first year. And the board was right away like, oh my God, how are you going to grow from 11.8 to 14.5? And I was like, well, that 11.8 was actually 12.5 because we ended up having a lot more expenses than we anticipated because we were shooting blind moving into the new building. And I said, so really, what's different about this than growing from a $300,000 budget to a $600,000 budget or to a $900,000 budget? We've been doing this our whole existence. And so they were finally like, okay, you think you can raise the money? I said, yes, I think we can. You think you can make the money and ticket sales that you need to make? Because typically an arts organization works on a 60-40% ratio, like 60 raised and 40 earned. I said, yeah, I think we can. And so they said, okay, well, then give it a try. And already we're above all of our goals for Flex Pass tickets and everything else going into the $14.5 million budget. So for me, it's a lot about visualization, mindset, and keeping positive because people are like, how did you hang on for 20 years while you tried to make this thing happen? And I said, I always just had fear of missing out. Like, what happened if I gave up the day before I would have finally realized the end? Like, I wouldn't have been able to realize that now stands there. It finally stands there, and it's so exciting, to see it. But what would have happened if I would have just quit? Then it would have all just vanished.
Yeah, wow. I heard so much great advice in there for anybody who might be starting something new. Knowing that you had such incredible commitment to this vision of yours, as an entrepreneur, how do you decide which opportunities to pursue and which ones to pass on? Because I know that crossroads comes up fairly often, maybe not in the decision to start your business, but in the decisions you make to grow your business.
So I think what's interesting is that entrepreneurship schools want to ask me to come speak because I run a not-for-profit, right? Which is typically not thought of as all entrepreneurial. And yet there's really nothing I feel that separates me from like making HP in my garage because I had to, for the first 3 years, like I said, I worked on a shoestring. I had a cell phone that was not my cell phone, is a 212 number. And back then, in 2004, there was long distance. So people didn't want to call my 212 number. And I was sort of like, what do I do? So I created this little website. Oh, my realtor, by the way, brought me to his boss, John, at John R. Wood Realtors, Phil Wood. I told him this story. This is what I want to do. And he wrote me a check for $5,000. With that $5,000, I started a website. I bought a business card. I made a logo and started. And I hit the ground running. And so I didn't know what to do. I was working out of my house. And I had this cell phone that I finally decided to buy a second cell phone, a 239 number. And I would answer the phone, wherever I was. I carried it with me all the time. It would ring, hello, Gulfshore Playhouse. This is Kristen. Can I help you? You just have to try to do the thing, right? I mean, you jump in and you do it. And so for me, that's no different than any entrepreneurial story out there because it was just me, myself, and I. And there was nobody to keep me going. There was nobody to keep me accountable. And there was nobody to report back to or work with or bounce ideas off of. And that is the entrepreneurial story, right? You have to figure out how to do it on your own and how to be your own accountability and how to figure out how to do all the 1,000 things that need to be done that day, from changing the toilet paper or whatever to figure out how to do accounting. If you didn't know how to do accounting, you've got to do it all. And so, I don't know, you asked the question and I don't think I answered it. I think I was working my way there.
That's okay. We were talking about how you decide which opportunities to pursue.
So I think it's really important to decide what, for me, the opportunities I chose to pursue. The vision was clear. I was working towards creating world-class Broadway-level theater with amazing professional actors and awesome, unique educational opportunities. That was it. That was the mission. And in not-for-profit parlance, they call that mission drift. If you start to go I think I'll start to sell telephones as well, or I think I'll invest in plant cultivation. You don't do that. But so right away I knew what mission drift meant for me, and I was like, I will never drift from this path unless it makes perfect sense and really feels like it's at least mission adjacent. But what I also promised myself was that I would always take every opportunity that had to do with networking. And so if people said, if I met you, Ashley, and you were like, you know what, I've got this person who loves theater, they're from Chicago, they support the Goodman Theater, I want you to meet them, I would say, okay. And I'd give you my card, and then I'd call you 2 weeks later and say, hey, Ashley, I never heard from you about that person. Can you introduce me? Can you set up a lunch for the three of us? Can we blah, 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 blah. And then that's how it started, was that I would just take every meeting with anybody that anybody thought would be good for me to push forward the goal. And then eventually, when we did get into the Norris Center, which is a little tiny municipal building with a 20 by 20 foot stage, not at all set up to be a professional theater, and yet I was like, the dream persists, I'll put professional actors on the stage. I would stand in that little lobby that had like basketballs on the front desk and whatever, because it was a community center, and I would greet people, and I would kiss the babies, and I would hug the people, and I would do whatever, because I was gonna, like, person by person, make the network. And to this day, I don't stand in the lobby that much anymore, because up till the pandemic I did. Then the pandemic kind of broke me of that habit. But now I've got a great set of fundraisers, and I say to them, the first most important thing is you have to stand in that lobby every single night, because many not-for-profits don't have the luck that we have of having our patrons come in front of us every single night. Mm-hmm. And so I said, you got to be there, because when that person walks up and says to somebody, how do I get involved? How do I get into that donors lounge? How do I support your education programs? How do I this? How do I that? They've got to have somebody to meet, somebody to talk to. And I feel that I created that idea for myself based on just this idea that the next person I meet might be the next person that makes the dream come true.
Oh, wonderful. You mentioned that a lot of the work itself was solo, but you really seem to channel the power of a community throughout the last 20-something years, right? So what advice would you give leaders or entrepreneurs on building trust and loyalty with both their team and their community?
So I think decide what your passion is, because people believe in people ultimately, and they, you can come up with the slick marketing scheme, and you can talk about it in great words, and AI can come up with a great blurb for you, and all the things can happen. But if you're over there, hello. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, nobody's going to be passionate about what you're doing, right? I mean, if I could tell you how many times I've heard people reflect back the word passion to me, because they see it in me. They see that I'm like living and breathing it, and I think that theater can change the world, and I know that I work for the gods of theater. So considering that I think I work for the gods of theater, my covenant with the audience is make sure the theater is good, literally. Make sure the plays are good. Make sure the education programs are stellar. Like, make sure that when they step in, whatever space it was, whether it was our old little tiny space or our new awesome space, make sure that what they get is more than they expected to get. And that's how I feel like you build trust. We've got board members who've been on our board since literally 2007. And never have gone away. We've got patrons who came through the doors, the first show with that Tony-nominated actor in 2006, whose names are still on our roster and we're still giving to us today, because I think we never let them down. And I would stay up night and day. I would do whatever I had to do. I would fire whoever I had to fire and hire whoever I had to hire to get to the point where I could be like, yes, I once again was able to fulfill my promise to them, which is give them good product.
Yeah, I think everyone in here can feel your passion. I can see your passion.
Sorry, I can see you going like this.
No, not at all. Actually, I feel like leaning into it even more. It's magnetic. So a slightly different question here. It sounds like you believed in yourself and your vision. Sounds like most of the time.
I believed in the vision.
Okay.
I can't say like I believed in myself, because I'm not even sure that I was the equation. Like, I feel like the universe wanted a theater and education center on that corner in Naples, Florida, and put out the call. And I happened to be the like lunatic that answered the call, because it is a little bit messianic, like the way I believe in it so much, and I always did, you know what I mean? And so I will tell you that there were so many hard times, and I know that's a question later, but there were so many hard times, and yet there was always an angel on our shoulder at the same time. And so I just believed that I was, in a way, the vessel, and I had to get this thing out,
How wonderful.
to serve the world.
Well, speaking of hard times, can you share a time when something you were certain would work didn't? How did you, handle it, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, so there are early stories, and there are middle stories, and there are recent stories. But let's talk about the early stories. So it was a few years in, and I decided we were going to do our first musical. And it was not only just a first musical, but it was like a world premiere musical by a new author. And I'd gone up to New York and cast and got these Broadway actors to come down and do it. And because we were doing this new musical, I was going to build the Norris Center was just a flat floor with chairs like this. So I said, I'm going to partner with the woman who runs the Norris Center, the park manager, get her to pay for half of these risers so that we can put the chairs up on risers. And we didn't really even have any lighting. It wasn't meant to be a theater. So I had hired this guy who kind of built the set and like put up the lights. But it was like putting up lights like, oh, look, there's a wire. I'll clip it to that wire. Or, here's an eave. I'll clip it here. So the city of Naples showed up. We also thought we needed spotlights, but the only spotlights in town were these stadium level powered spotlights. And so the room's only about this big. So we had these giant stadium level lights in the back of the room, and the actors were going blind and they were screaming. And then the city of Naples showed up and gave us a cease and desist because they said, you can't be hanging these lights like that. It's going to be a danger. And then also they hauled the risers away. And I was like, wait a minute, I partnered with the woman who runs the city of Naples building. How can you be taking them away? They're like, they're made of wood, they're a fire hazard, whatever. And I sat there, I can remember sitting there on the platform of this light, this spotlight that now had like 3 layers of gray gel inside to try to tone it down so it wasn't blinding the actors anymore. And I thought, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? That had been like 4 years by that point. And I just thought, I am insane. Like, what am I doing? Why would this be where I want to spend my time? Like, I went to college. Like, I was like, what am I doing? Working for free. And this is ridiculous. The actors are going blind. I'm getting a cease and desist letter. And so, I don't know. That was 2008, probably. In 2009, we had to pay the Actors Union $35,000 to get. Back then, it still exists. We have to bond. You have to bond with the union so that they know that if your season goes south or your show goes south, the actors will all get 2 weeks of pay. So you have to pay that much up front. But back then, they didn't even ask for upfront. They asked for the whole 2 weeks worth of salary and everything else, not just a little bond. And so I needed to come up with $35,000. And I kept thinking we were going to raise it. And it was Monday. And I went to have lunch with my board chair. And I said, if we don't come up with $35,000 by Friday, the union isn't going to let us start rehearsals. And if we're not allowed to start rehearsals, I think we're done. I think we're just going to close it up. And can I tell you, in 2 days, he came back with $35,000. He got 7 people this was right before the downturn. So Naples was still fat and happy, and he found 7 people to donate $5,000 each, and he showed up. And I felt like that was one of those angel moments where I was like, okay, I'm supposed to keep on going. And so look for the angel moments, because you're going to lose your chutzpah at times. You're going to be like, what am I thinking? What was I doing? This is a stupid product. I'm stupid. Like I should just go work for, IBM or something and make, $500,000 a day. But it's worth it. Keep going, because the dream can come true.
So from scraping together $35,000 to raising $72 million for the new theater and education center, that's an extraordinary entrepreneurial achievement. What strategies or mindsets made that possible?
So I have to go back to visualizing, and this is becoming more popular. Right? They talk about baseball heroes that, visualize making the home run before they do and things like that. It's real. So I would stand on my balcony on Bayfront, which is now, I don't live there anymore, but that apartment is directly across the street from where the theater is. And I would stand there when it was nothing. It was an abandoned strip mall called Grand Central Station, and then eventually it was raised, and then it was just grass. And I just kept standing there thinking, that's where the theater should go. That's a perfect spot for a theater. I would close my eyes, and I would visualize this theater growing up out of the land, right there, over and over and over again. And there was also this book that was popular back then. It was called The Secret, and it was about how to visualize whatever. And they had little, things you could print out, whatever. So I printed out this giant check, and I'd written a check to Gulfshore Playhouse for $10 million from Patty and Jay Baker, who I think everybody probably knows, but just in case, are very well-known philanthropists, especially for the arts and other things too. But in Naples, they're really generous. Didn't really know them very well, but put the check in there inside my bathroom cabinet, because I didn't want people to know exactly how crazy I was, but it was there, and I would open the cabinet door every day, obviously getting ready or whatever, and I'd see it. And I did that a lot. And I moved out of that apartment in 2014. And at that point, we didn't have any land. We didn't have any money. We probably had, like I said, maybe a $1.6 million budget. We weren't building any buildings anytime soon. And I was, packing up and moving out, and I ripped that check down off of the inside of that cabinet door, and I said, it doesn't work. What was I thinking? This is stupid, And 1 year later, to the day almost, Patty and Jay gave us $10 million. And also because we asked. So I don't want to make it sound like the magic of visualization, right? Patty and Jay just showed up at my door with a check. It took, I met Patty, I think in 2007 or 2008. They started with a $5,000 sponsorship. So this was not a given that they would ever give us $10 million. But it's important to continue to cultivate, right? So even when I said I was taking every meeting I could get with new people, you have to also remember, like, do not only look out the window, look in the mirror. What I mean by that is look at the people who are already surrounding you and already supportive. And I hate to say it, but ask again, because they might be helpful. Or not just ask again. You actually want to be really careful of how much you ask. But what you really want to do is you want to give them some love. You want to give them attention, and you want to make them feel like they're part of it. So if they're investors in your product, you want to show them what is your first prototype. You want to talk to them about your plans for what's going to happen in the next 6 months, right? You want to be sure that you're inviting them to the launch party. You want to make sure they're always, always involved, and like they feel like they're part of something and proud of what they can do. And that's what I was doing with Patty and Jay all the way from 2007 to 2014, 15. And I started to get really serious at sort of the beginning of 2015. We knew I had started to think there's only so much more we can do in this little space, and we need to now start to really mobilize, looking for land and really getting serious about starting a capital campaign. So I started, of course, talking to Patty and Jay a little bit more. Invited Jay and Patty out to dinner. Patty was sick, but she said, Jay, you should go anyway. And so I had dinner with Jay, and that was great. And then a couple of weeks after that, we had lunch, and I started talking to them about Patty being on the board. And she said, no, I can't do it because for whatever reason. And I said, Jay, will you be on our board? He's like, why are you asking me? I don't even like theater. And so I was like, because you make little things into big things, and you know how to do that. And we need somebody like you to help us grow from small to big. And he was like, ah. And so a couple weeks after that, they came to see a show. And at the intermission, Patty came out and she handed me $1. And I said, can I help you? Do you want a bottle of water? And she said, no. And I said, so what is this? And she said, it's a down payment. My heart starts beating, right? I mean, Patty Baker doesn't, if the big investor says to you, I'm giving you a down payment, don't ask for what, just say thank you. So I did say for what. This is why I'm telling you, don't say for what. I said, for what? And she said, you'll see. And she walked away. And I had that $1 in my hot little hand, my heart's beating out of my chest. And I went to my next board meeting, and I had the $1 still. And I said, you guys, Patty Baker just gave me $1 and told me it was a down payment. We've got to get serious. And they were all like, okay. So we start now really looking for land. And this took about 6 months. We had looked all over 2 counties. And guess what? The spot that was available was right across the street from my apartment in Bayfront. And so we now had to get serious. We went to Patty and Jay, invited them to come to the office, and sat them down and told them the whole story and whatever, and asked. Big piece of advice. If you ask somebody for anything, especially if it's big, don't talk after the ask. Just say, so we'd like you to give us $10 million. And no matter how long it takes, wait until they speak next. We had this board member with us at that meeting, and the wait seemed interminable. And he started to say, but if you can't afford that, and I went, I was just like, shut up. Because you don't want to give anybody an out, right? So they said, oh, this is a big deal. Let us think about this. We have to go out into the lobby and talk about it. So they go out into the lobby and talk about it. The longest 7 minutes of my life. And they were just doing it. I mean, Patty loves surprises, and she loves to pull people's chains, I swear, because they were just playing with us because they knew they were going to say yes. And they were talking about what they were going to have for dinner, and maybe they could have a margarita. Like, I don't even know what. My staff overheard them talking, But meanwhile, I'm in there sweating, So they come back in and they say, yes. And it was just crazy, right? I mean, I could just remember getting totally cold because 10 years in, finally, it was clear. 11 years in, it was finally clear, oh my God, the dream is going to come true. But we still only had $1 million and $1.6 million budget, and the match, the gift was actually a match. So even though they were very kind and generous to give us the money for the land first, before we made the match officially, they were still like, we're not giving you this money until you match it. And it took us and I say us, and honestly it was me, because we didn't have great fundraisers at that point. We were now in the process, because of that money and because of that potential match, able to start to get good fundraisers, to do a feasibility study, to start to build up our infrastructure, but it was only in real time happening. And there was a clock ticking, and there was a hurricane. Hurricane Irma came through in the middle of that. And so I knew I had to like call everybody I knew and ask them for everything from, you know, a $10,000 to $100,000. I was asking people for $1 million, but at that point, nobody was giving huge gifts. So we did match $10 million, but it was like tiny gifts of $100,000 or $10,000, you know, whatever. And so we made that match. And then so that was 2019, 4 years took us to make the match. And you know what happened after that? We had a global pandemic. So that was the next really hard thing that came along.
Wow. Okay. So you've definitely mentioned cultivating relationships is really important to get to that ask and that initial investment. How do you maintain donor and investor confidence throughout a multi-year large-scale project like you have?
This was really the hard part because it took a long time. They gave us the gift in 2015. We didn't actually announce it until 2016 because they wanted to keep it quiet, and we did it at our gala. So they, you know, and then it took 3 more years to raise the money to match it. And then we basically had a pandemic. So it's hard to say those were the hardest years because you're in it. You can see the vision of the castle on the hill. You know that there are people behind you now. You've got backers who believe in you, and yet you're totally not. That's when, in a way, it starts to get real. Because before that, you can dream the dream. The dream looks like whatever you want it to look like. You know you're totally, you know, young, scrappy, and happy. But like, so therefore you're like not even anywhere near the dream. Like the dream's way over there. But then when you get that $10 million or whatever that first big investment is, you get like close enough that you can feel it or taste it or see it in your mind's eye. But you're like, oh, now I really see the distance between here and there. And so did everybody else. So everybody, literally everybody who I met and came across were like, except for Patty and Jay at that point, were like, who are true visionaries. And I mean, our world in Southwest Florida would not be the same if these 2 people did not exist. So I just can't say enough about their generosity, but they're also visionaries. So they saw it, they had no problem. But everyone else was like, you're crazy. You know, you're crazy. This is a crazy idea. This is never going to happen. And I would be like, yep, I know. Yep, that's what they tell me. Everybody tells me I'm crazy, you know what I mean? And it's just like, and then you're trying to have to say, well, look, we've already raised $6 million. And they're like, yeah, but $6 million. How much is this capital campaign? Well, at that point, it was like 48 or 58. And it kept growing. Because with every reason why, the hurricane, the next hurricane, or the pandemic, and the supply chain issues, and the inflation, and all the things that kept coming. Well, how much do you have to raise? You know what I mean? So it was rough. What happened was we had in 2019, early 2020, March 2nd, we had our first gala, March 2nd, 2020, we had our first gala that went over $1 million, where we raised over $1 million in a night, which was incredible because, like I told you, in 2015, our whole budget was like 1.6 or something. So that we were amazed. And 2 weeks to the day later, I was standing on a hill outside the North Center and laying off 3/4 of my staff and bawling my eyes out, right? So then it became, well, and this is not what this is about, entrepreneurial, except it is about entrepreneurialism in a way, because then it became, okay, what do I have to do to keep this organization alive? And it became the entrepreneurial spirit in me. I think that helped me figure out how to keep it alive, right? Because what do entrepreneurs have to be good at? Pivoting. You've got to be good at pivoting, right? Because plan A never works, right? I call myself the plan B girl because there's literally no plan A. I mean, plan A just never works. Plan A is almost like the pipe dream in a way, right? Plan A is like, let me test the waters. Oh yeah, no, that's not going to work. Now you got to find out the real way it's going to work, right? And that's plan B or C or D. But pivoting is important. So, and also now I only had 8 people left out of, at that point we had a staff of like 40. So I laid off all those people. We had 8 people. We were all isolated. We were in our homes on the Zoom every morning at 10 a.m. I was like, okay, guys, we're going to meet every morning at 10 a.m. Now, I had kept like a person in production, a person in artistic, a person in finance, a person in fundraising. So in other words, a person in education. In other words, nobody that had a department. Everybody was in their own little silo. But I made us all talk to each other at 10 a.m. every morning for an hour and a half, and figure out whatever we were figuring out. If we were talking about fundraising, education, and arts had to listen to it. If we were talking about art, then education and fundraising had to listen to it. And it actually created our culture that still lives and breathes to this day, that we're a super collaborative, kind of swim like a school of fishes kind of company. And that started then, on that day, when I was like, out of the lack of any other idea of what to do, I started gathering everybody at 10 a.m. and having everybody talk about every part of the business. And that was amazing. We also went to quarterly budgets. I was like, guys, we just approved a budget. There's no way this budget's going to happen. The union won't even answer the phone. So I don't know when the next minute we're going to be able to produce a show is, and the governor won't let us get in the building anyway, and such, and this and that. We got to get tested 3 times a week, and I don't know where they're going to give us tests. I mean, there were so many obstacles, and I don't need to get into that at all, except what I will tell you is that a board member of ours, who's a teacher at Babson College, wrote a white paper about this period, and he calls it decisive realism, because so many people want to couple empathy with making a good business decision. They want to think that you're making a good business decision, and therefore you'll do the empathetic thing, like a lot of theaters in the country kept all their people working through an entire year of doing nothing. They were doing literally nothing except sewing masks, or something that was really altruistic. And they used up all their PPP money, and they went into deficit. Like, they used up their reserves, paying people to do nothing. I was the one who laid everybody off, because I knew that if we had to cancel this show, we were going to have to cancel the show after it. And if we canceled the show after it, then our whole season was through, and there's no reason to keep 32 people, because my job was to keep the business alive. And if I could do that, then I could live to fight another day and serve all those people with the covenant of, we're going to give them a great product. And so when it comes down to saving your business, or like doing the nice thing, don't forget that the nice thing might be actually making sure they still have a job in 4 months when they can come back and work full time for you again. It's not always the thing that looks like the nice thing on the day.
I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs and students in our School of Entrepreneurship that one of the biggest challenges is, I know what I'm passionate about, but I have to learn all these other aspects of business. You've made some hard choices. You've kept yours alive. So how do you navigate going from a background in theater, a passion for theater, an education in theater, to navigating all these other areas that are critical for Gulfshore Playhouse staying open?
Totally, it sucks. If I could tell you the amount of time I spent fighting City Hall, like just trying to get a building built, and then fighting with contractors, trying to like make sure they're not making mistakes, screwing things up. Designers, architects, engineers, all the people, I mean, years and years of my life. But not even that. At some point, I went to an executive coach, because I was like, look, I'm a director. That's why I started theater companies, because I'm a director. I love to direct. I'm directing the first show of the season this year. I still direct, in other words. And I went to this executive coach, and I was like, look, I don't get it, these people. I said, I go into the rehearsal room. We try something else. We rehearse. I say, I don't like it. Let's go back to the first idea. Why don't you just go out that door instead of that door? And the actors go, okay. Or I go to tech, and I'm looking at the thing, and I go, there's some light bleed coming in up there. Can we fix it? In the production people go, okay. And that's how it works. You're on the admin side, and you go, hey guys, that picture's hung a little crooked, and people start crying, and they think mom is mad, and they're going to get fired. And I'm like, oh my God, like, no, I knew that. What's going on? And so I had to really, really turn my head around about running the business, because very often, you learn that there's people who are good idea people, but you keep them away from running the business, and that's why there are COOs and all that stuff. But I'm the kind of person I have a business mind and an arts mind, and I'm also not a micromanager, but I like to be involved in all of it, probably because I'm a founder. So yes, we have a COO, and yes, he runs a lot of the back end stuff, but I'm still involved in the touchy-feely stuff. And sometimes you're just like, oh, it sucks, but you've got to do it. You've got to do it if you're going to make the wheel turn. So you were like, no, I just got into this because I wanted to create my widget. And you're like, yeah, okay, but who's going to sell the widget, and who's going to market the widget, and who's going to make sure that it's making actual money and that people aren't stealing from you or whatever, so you've just got to be involved in all of it. And I just think that you've got to tell yourself that this is what you signed up for, because you're not just going to be able to make your widget, otherwise nobody's going to care about the widget but you, and you've got to build the whole infrastructure.
So I have just a few more questions for you. And I know we have some audience members. We're going to get some questions from them as well. Right, Scott? Yeah? Okay, great. So looking back, what's the single most valuable leadership lesson you've learned on this journey?
Oh my God, so many. Well, let me start with one that I can think of right off the top of my head, and then I'll see if I have any others. But a board member who ran the Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., she was also working for a not-for-profit. She said to me, and it was attached to, there's the Folger Theater and there's the Folger Shakespeare Library. So she's got a theater that was not under her tutelage at all, but it was, obviously she's a Shakespeare scholar, so she was involved with theater a lot. And she said, in order to be a good artistic director, you have to find the fine line between leading and being led. And I actually think that actually became a leadership lesson for me, because I do think that for me, how do I want to put this? I have several people who work for me who came from a different kind of culture, and it takes about a year to thaw them out, because they're either like abused dogs, they're a little bit like this. Like I'll be like, hey, why did you do that? And they'll be like, I'm going to fire you. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm not going to fire you. I'm the most collaborative person on earth. So what they're surprised by is that I'll be like, well, what do you think? Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, who's gonna do that? Who's gonna implement that? Okay, who's gonna have the accountability for that? Okay, great. Well, what do you think? Okay, da, 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 da. And so I do think that I've taken that learning lesson of leadership, is that you've got to lead and be led, because you can't just be a dictator. You just can't, right? If you don't listen to what people say and really give them empowerment and give them a voice, and it's hard because you've got this entrepreneurial spirit and you've created this thing for yourself and you are the founder of it and it's yours to share all of the ideas and to share the decision making and share. Let's be clear, I still am the person who can make the final decision. But very rarely do I have to say, okay, let me put it this way. This is what we're going to do, and I want you to figure out how to help me do it. It's like once in a blue moon that happens. Usually it's like, not death by committee in any way, but we are like I said, we swim like a school of fish. So that was an important lesson for me.
Great, thank you. Well, if we have any burning questions in the audience.
When you first started, when you weren't earning anything, did you work any side jobs as you were doing your passion at the same time?
Yeah, it is important to work some side jobs. I wasn't, because I had sold my apartment in New York City and I had some money that I was living off of. I was married at the time too, so my husband was helping me, eat, my ex-husband. But I guess it was too hard for him. Helping me eat was too traumatizing, so he had to leave, which is fine. People said, what happened? You got divorced? I said, yeah, the husband went up against the theater and the theater won. But if you need to take a side job in order to get the dream realized, you have to do whatever it takes, take the side job for sure. But then figure out what to do with your schedule, right? If that means you have to get up every morning at 6 a.m. and work from 6 to 10 on the dream, and then go to work and work the real schedule, then do that. Otherwise, then what are you doing? You're just playing around. You know what I mean? Then you're just like, I'm not really serious. I'm just majoring in this in college and I'll go do something else with my life, right? Find the time to work on the thing, even if you have to work the other job.
Any other questions?
Thank you. What's the toughest decision ever that you've taken? In a moment where you felt that you had a very limited amount of information, but you really couldn't afford spending more time to collect more information or make a more informed decision, and you had to go for it. Is there a specific one? I'm sure there are many, as in the path of fully entrepreneurs, but like one that was really a lot and you.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the pandemic was the hardest thing I've ever lived through. And the pandemic. And there was no time to figure anything out, and nobody had any information. So what I will say is, and this goes back to the question you asked about fundraising, is that at that point in the pandemic, we were at about $25 million, and we needed to raise, by that point, $66 million was what we thought the total was at that point. So we were $40 million off, and the whole world had just shut down. Some people's businesses grew during the pandemic, but my, live theater it was completely crushed. It was completely dead. And so, frankly, I don't even know how I got out of bed in the morning, because it was like, how do I've been doing all this. Like, I was convinced that the angel was on my shoulder. Like, what's going on? How did this just happen? We're all sitting in our homes and we're probably going to go out of business. And a year from now, Gulfshore Playhouse won't exist and I'll be working, at IBM. Who knows? But so the hardest thing to do is to try to figure out how to pivot with very little information in a way that is always going to keep the business alive. And then also figure out how to break the mold, because, excuse me, because, for example, the rule of thumb at that point had been, you never ask for people for real money, for big numbers. Hold on. I'll keep you in suspense. You never ask people for big money over Zoom. It was unheard of. You would never, if you're going to go ask an investor to invest $1 million in your company or $5 million in your company, you're going to go sit down with them at lunch, be in their home, have it be like a wonderful ask. And then you find out we're all separated and we're not allowed to see each other. And the stock market started taking off at the end of 2020. And so we were sort of like, well, bite the bullet. And we said, we know this isn't normal, but we want to keep on going with this capital campaign. Can we ask you for money over Zoom? We didn't say it exactly that way, but we were like, we'd like to have a meeting and talk to you about the progress that we're making. And they said yes, and we would ask for this money, and they were saying yes. So we had gotten to the point where we had, in April of 21, we had now a board member had come in with some big money, a couple of other people followed, and we had now 35 million. And we knew that we needed to get to 40 million for us to get the bridge loan, to get the green light to actually break ground. And I walked in one day we were back at work in the office. We just couldn't produce theater at this point in April of 21. It was like March. And my now chief advancement officer said to me, she was crying. I asked somebody for $5 million and they said no. And now I don't think I know anywhere else to go at this point in the pandemic to get to this 40 million. So I think we were going to have a party in April to celebrate getting to 40 million. We have to cancel the party. And I said, hell no, we're not going to cancel the party. We're going to have it outside. We're going to do it on the land. Nobody wants to gather inside still yet. The vaccines had only just come out. So we'll have it on the land outside. We'll hire, screens and a singer, and we'll tell them we're having a party because we're going to raise that $5 million over the summer while they're gone. And I don't want them to miss the party. So we're going to have the party now to celebrate the fact that we got to groundbreaking. Got to have the money enough to groundbreak. So she's, dries her tears and she's like, okay, we're going to have a party. So we set up this party and we asked certain people to speak, and unbeknownst to me, Patty and Jay Baker planned to get up and say, we're sick of waiting, so we're going to give you another $10 million. But this time, we don't want to wait 4 years for you to match it. You have to match it in 2 months. So this goes back to trust, because we had been so careful about cultivating people and interacting with people, and all the people, there were serious people who'd been with us from 2004 forward who had not given to the capital campaign yet because they still didn't trust us enough to think the money was going to be there, that we were really going to get there. But with Patty and Jay's, God bless them, generosity, then we went from 34 to the potential of 54 million, and now we were well on our way to building that building, and people saw that. And they came in like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. We raised $10 million pretty much in a week. And it was like magic. 54 million, there we were, and we were ready to break ground, and we actually did. So it's about getting, it's a little bit about playing with your own head. It's like getting through the hardest thing by telling yourself that you can do it. Yes, no, we can't. No, we're not going to cancel the party. We got to have the party, right? Because otherwise, if we cancel the party, then there's no energetic opportunity for magic to happen. If we hadn't had that party, they might not have ever given us that extra $10 million. And then where would we be, right? So you've just got to always act as if, and then keep getting up and putting on the right clothes and go and making the ask. It's crazy. But it's like telling yourself you can do it. It can be done.
Off of the COVID, I wonder if there's any long-lasting changes in the industry that you witnessed. Is it back to before COVID landscape or what's changed?
Some things in my industry that have changed is that before, regional theaters didn't really have the money to employ understudies, like that was really a Broadway thing, and now a lot of regional theaters have understudies at the ready to be able to step in for somebody, because even though COVID officially isn't a thing anymore, if someone in the cast were to come down with COVID, they'd be, everyone would freak out, so we would quickly want to replace them with a replacement. So it's become more expensive. There's a lot more people who are like, we bring everybody from New York. We have a lot of 2-bedroom apartments. There are a lot of people who are like, I'm not going to live with anybody. Put me in a 1-bedroom, which we don't have a lot of, which we're now in the process of creating. But, things like that are just like germ related. But in terms of like how we make theater, not a lot has changed. Thank you.
So just asking a personal question, I think your life story is really inspiring. When you laid off some of those coworkers during that time when you had to take that business survival in mind, were there any of them that started to work for free like you did?
No. When I laid off all those people, nobody worked for free for us. They went and got unemployment, luckily, because the unemployment kicked in because of the pandemic. So that was good. And then we laid them all off in March. And even as soon as August, we were always, you'll see this, the pattern, right? The plan is always having the plan ready for when lightning strikes in a good way. So for example, I was telling them, like, I don't know how we're ever going to get on the public, professional productions are going to get on our stage anytime soon because the union won't answer the phone. What else have we got going? Oh, now's the opportunity to build up our conservatory program because we've got kids and the kids don't have any COVID rules, right? So we knew that we had a set that we weren't going to be able to use from a play called The Lion in Winter, which was an old medieval set. So I was like, can we think about a musical that we can do with kids that we could do in this medieval set? And they were like, let's do The Addams Family. I said, great. So we had these kids all cast and ready, but DeSantis hadn't opened up what he called summer camps yet. But we were there and we were ready and the set was up and the kids were cast. And then the day before we were supposed to start rehearsal, Governor DeSantis opens up the summer camp. So we were like, boom, we're ready to go. But had we not got the set ready and the kids ready and the casting ready, whatever, he might have opened up summer camps and it might have taken us 2 or 3 or 4 months to get going, right? So it's always just like, be ready because you never know when lightning's going to strike. So.
Can you give us a sneak peek on next year, what's going on, news?
Lots of fun things going on next year. We're starting with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, a great classic in our small space. We now have 2 theaters, so we've got a small studio space. Going to do White Christmas in the big space. And we've got all kinds of educational opportunities from everything from lectures to Broadway Zumba to conservatory training. We do a lot in school. We teach content curriculum in the classroom through using theater as a model, making it fun. And we've just got lots going on. But what I really hope happens next year is that we win the Tony Award for Best Regional Theater. That would be exciting.
Well, knowing your visualization, I have a feeling that might be coming.
I'm working on it.
Well, so I hope that we all get a chance to come visit you and see the new season and all the great things that are going on. So I do have one last question to end on, and that is looking forward, years from now, when you look back on your career and all the accolades, I know I didn't read your bio, but I know that there are many, all the successes, the accomplishments, all the things that you've built, what do you hope the standing ovation is for?
I saw this question on your when you sent me the questions in advance, and I chose not to answer it in my head because I was like, I don't know. I don't want a standing ovation. I really just hope that people will be inspired by the idea that you can do it and do it for themselves. Honestly, like I don't feel like I want a standing ovation or anything like that, but I'm excited. What I'm surprised about is that people love the building. Not that I didn't think they would love the building because I worked really hard to make sure that the new theater was beautiful. But it was all in service in my mind to making better theater and better education. That was just my vehicle. And so along the way, if we got to do that to create a vehicle, because good theater needs good infrastructure. You need to have fly towers and wings and things like that. So if you're going to make it, then make it beautiful, because I do believe that beauty elevates. Mm-hmm. But it was never, that wasn't the dream really. The dream was to create great theater and great education. So when people started to be like, I'm so happy I live in Naples because this building has changed the landscape of Naples, this iconic cultural center. I'm so proud to live here. And I'm sort of like, that's interesting. You know, when I get excited is when the building is filled with education and little kids singing and dancing, and then corporate training going on over here, and two shows running at the same time, and people bustling through the lobby and coming in to drink coffee in our lobby bar that's open all day, you know, all that stuff. That's what makes me happy, is when people are using it. But maybe it'll be the thing, is that they'll remember that I helped make that building happen. So hopefully.
Well, you are definitely leaving inspiration in your wake. So Kristen Coury, it was such an honor to get to speak with you tonight, and I know our audience feels the same way. So thank you so much on behalf of the Daveler and Kauanui School of Entrepreneurship for being one of our voices of impact.
Pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to be here.